Hello, in this video we're going to talk about the Canon EOS R mirrorless camera and what you can expect if you pair it up with a Tokina 11 to 20mm f2.8 lens. Now I don't own an EOS R yet, but I just came back from a local camera store and they let me test out this duo. At first, it's worth mentioning that the Tokina 11 to 20mm lens is actually made for APS-C sensor cameras, so it's actually really interesting how it performs on a full-frame body like the EOS R. This video is going to be divided into two sections. First, I'm going to talk about the photo capabilities, and then I'm going to focus about the video mode. So if you're interested only in video capabilities, you can skip to this timestamp. Okay, let's get started. As you can see here, I'm putting the lens via a standard RF to EF mount adapter. Now, if you do this with a Canon's own EFS lens, the camera automatically switches to 1.6 times crop mode, because those lenses are designed to work with APS-C sensors, and the 1.6 crop is the crop factor of the APS-C sensors. With the Tokina 11 to 20mm, however, I can manually choose whether I want to stay in the 1.6 times crop or just stick to full frame instead. Now, bear in mind that the Canon EOS R has an effective resolution of 30.3 megapixel. So if you apply the 1.6 times crop factor, the effective resolution becomes only about 11.8 megapixel, which is really mediocre and does not interest me whatsoever. So I'm sticking with full frame mode. In this mode, when the lens is zoomed out all the way to 11mm, right on the LCD screen we can see the issue, a massive unrecoverable vignette around the center of the frame. This is expected to happen, and it is due to the fact that, like I said earlier, this lens is designed for APS-C side sensor, which means it produces a smaller image circle on the sensor, smaller than the full frame sensor, hence the pitch black darkness visible in frame. However, as you zoom in, the image circle becomes bigger and bigger, and at a certain focal length, the image circle actually covers the entire sensor. So I performed a series of shots in 1mm focal length increments to empirically find out the cutoff focal length. Here are the results. In this Photoshop document, I imported the images shot at different focal lengths. I was shooting it handheld, so I had to move those layers around a little bit and of course scale them down to align them. The white rectangular outlines depict the images I was getting out of the EOS R with incrementally zooming the lens in from 11mm. At 15mm you can see that here in the corner, the image circle is just big enough to cover the sensor, and then from 60mm on, the sensor is fully covered by the image circle. So the conclusion is that this lens is very much usable in full frame mode with the EOS R in the focal range from 16 to 20mm. Canon has a very popular full-frame ultra-wide-angle zoom lens, which is 16 to 35mm 2.8, and both the Tokina and this lens produce the same field of view at the widest end of the focal range, but the Tokina stops at 20mm, whereas the EF lens can zoom in all the way to 35mm. Both has a constant maximum aperture of 2.8, but the EF lens is actually 4 times more expensive. Yeah, that's right, 4 times more expensive. Now, of course, the EF lens probably has a better optical formula, has a better glass, and produces a sharper image. But the Tokina 11 to 20mm f2.8 is still a fantastic lens and probably the best in its class, which is ultra-wide-angle zoom lenses for APS-C cameras. It's the only one that has a 2.8 constant aperture, and it's really sharp, sharper than Canon's EFS ultra-wide-angle lenses. Now, let's take a look at the usability of this lens in video mode. As you probably know, the EOS R is able to record in 4K, but applies a massive 1.8 times crop. So a lot of people around the internet are recommending that you can actually put an EFS lens on the camera like the Canon 10 to 18mm, but if you do that, yes, you get the wider field of view in 4K, but you have to stick into 1.8 crop mode even at 1080p, and on top of that, you cannot record in 60 frames per second and in 120 frames per second in 720p. This is outrageous, and for me, it's a deal breaker. But luckily, when I mounted the Tokina 11 to 20mm, I was happy to see that none of the frame rate and resolution combinations were grayed out. Yay! We are also not forced to use crop mode in video in 1080p, we can choose either full frame or crop mode ourselves. But first, let's take a look at 4K recording. The camera applies the ever so hated 1.8 times crop, which is even more than 1.6 times APS-C crop, so it's no surprise that even when we zoom out all the way to 11mm, we see no vignetting whatsoever. And since we are effectively at 11mm focal length, this Tokina lens actually produces a wider field of view than the more expensive Canon 16 to 35 on this camera. 11mm with a 1.8 times crop produces an effective focal length of about 20mm, whereas the 16mm with the 1.8 times crop produces an effective focal length of about 29 to 30mm, so it's considerably tighter. In 4K mode, the camera does not offer dual pixel autofocus, so I tested how well would it pull focus if I move this focus checker from the X-Rite color checker video back and forth. To my surprise, the results were quite good, definitely good enough for keeping focus on your face while you vlog. In comparison, this is how pulling focus works in 1080p with dual pixel autofocus. In 1080p full frame mode, obviously we see the vignette again at 11mm, and similarly to photo mode, the vignette disappears at 16mm. So again, the effective zoom range in 1080p is 16 to 20mm. However, in video mode, we can actually activate the crop mode, which is 1.8 times crop again, which gives us effectively a second zoom range of this lens, which is an equivalent of about 28 to 36mm focal range without any loss in image quality. Also, for the sake of this test, I did try to record a clip at 60 frames per second at 1080p. Like we see here, there is no problem. Also, it's perfectly possible to record in 120 frames per second at 720p. The camera handles these without any problem whatsoever. So in conclusion, if you're upgrading from an APS-C camera and already own a Tokina 11 to 20mm like me, or maybe you already own an EOS R and you're unhappy with how tight it is in 4K, then I can highly recommend the Canon EOS R and Tokina 11 to 20mm f2.8 lens duo. It gives you a larger field of view in 4K than the EF 16 to 35 zoom lens, and Tokina also has an older model of this lens, which is 11 to 16mm, and I'm pretty sure you will be able to use it in a similar way. But considering the smaller focal range, in photo mode or in 1080p full frame mode, you basically have a prime 16mm lens. Now, both the Tokina 11 to 20mm and the Tokina 11 to 16mm have one considerable flaw when it comes to video work, and that is it's relatively loud autofocus mode. But luckily, I have came up with a workaround for that, and if you're interested how to solve this problem, you can click on the card right here, and I will also link to this video in the description box below. Alright, that's it for me for today. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, hit the like button down below, it really makes a difference. Also, consider subscribing to the channel because there will be more videos like this, and I also make travel videos, vlogs, photography tutorials, filmmaking tutorials, drone flying tutorials, so if you're interested in any of that, you know what to do. But that's it for now. Have a good day. See you next time. Bye bye.